I received the email over breakfast at Camp Canada South, our dusty forward base near northern Kuwait. It was already pushing 38 degrees that morning. Dry wind rattling the walls of the mess tent, and I'd just finished a 12-hour patrol rotation. I had a routine shower, chow check messages. Most days it was the usual clutter, KF internal bulletins, NATO logistics, updates, the odd email from payroll. But this time, one subject line cut through the noise. Let's handle this like adults. It was from Rachel, my wife. We'd been married 12 years, met after my first deployment to Afghanistan, fell hard and fast, and somehow made it work through rotations, relocations, and long months apart. I clicked it open, already sensing what was inside. 3 sentences. That's all it took to end everything. I've filed for divorce. I've emptied the joint account. Trevor's moving into the house this week. Attached was a PDF of the separation papers, temporary under Ontario law. No greeting, no goodbye, no concern about whether I was okay. Not even a question about if I'd made it through the last patrol alive. I read it once. Then again, closed my laptop. I didn't say a word to anyone. I walked to the communal showers, let the cold water crash over me like shrapnel. Then got dressed, laced my boots, and reported for duty as if nothing had changed. No one noticed, except Sergeant Mendez. He caught my eye while we were loading gear. "You good, Fraser?" "Just stuff back home," I replied. He nodded once. That was the end of it. Out here, we know not to press. Every man carries something, and silence can be its own kind of armor. The truth is, I wasn't shocked. 6 months before deployment, things had shifted. Rachel started coming home late from the dental clinic. She'd changed her phone password, the gym bag became a regular fixture in the back seat, and our phone calls, once warm, messy, loving, had turned short. Controlled, polite. I didn't confront her. I'm not wired that way. My father used to say, "Don't blow up, observe, prepare, strike when ready." So I did. Quietly, I opened a secondary account at Desjardins, separate from our Scotiabank joint account. I began diverting a small portion of my pay. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to keep me off the floor if things collapsed. I sent our key documents, house title, military benefits, IDs to my mother's house in Guelph for safekeeping. I packed away my grandfather's pocket watch, my late father's military coins, and the original engraved wedding band Rachel gave me on our first anniversary. All of it sealed in a steel lockbox tucked deep in my mom's basement. I didn't know who Trevor was. I'd never heard the name. But if he was moving in, that meant this wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd been calculating too. That night, I logged into the home security system, something she'd probably forgotten I could access remotely. The app loaded slowly on our shaky satellite connection, but when it did, it hit like a punch to the chest. There he was, some guy tall, clean-shaven, wearing my Sea Dog's hoodie, walking Murphy. Our dog out the front door. I watched as he returned inside, poured coffee into a mug I'd bought in Kingston, and laughed with Rachel in the kitchen. I'd remodeled myself during my last leave. She reached across the counter and touched his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at the screen. Not angry, not broken, just still. Then I opened my phone and started a note. Call Daniel, military lawyer, Petawawa JAG contact. Verify house title, it's under my name, through KF housing benefit. Freeze joint accounts. Check for recent refinance activity. Review camera access plus password locks. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. I just needed to wait and let their own choices trigger the trap. At 0500 the next morning before rotation started, I sent a single-line email to Daniel, need legal help, discreet, urgent. He replied within 45 minutes. Secure line, call me immediately. I stepped out into the dry morning wind, phone pressed to my ear, hearing his voice across 10,000 kilometers. "Liam," he said, his tone steady. "Tell me everything, we'll handle this, step by step." I looked out beyond the razor wire perimeter at the hazy sunrise breaking across the desert. For the first time since reading that email, I felt something settle in my chest. I wasn't done. Not even close. Rachel thought I was stuck halfway across the world, tied to a barracks cot and a chain of command. She thought distance would keep me from doing anything, at least until it was too late. What she didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for a storm long before the first drops fell. The morning after that phone call with Daniel, I filed a request for emergency leave through KF channels. I didn't mention. Rachel didn't say anything about finances or betrayal, just that I had a legal matter requiring immediate presence back in Ontario. The request was approved within 72 hours, quietly, no questions asked. Maybe the base commander had seen this sort of thing before, wives disappearing, homes, emptied documents forged, while the soldier was still writing letters home. I didn't tell Rachel I was coming. That was the point. Before my flight out of Kuwait, I reviewed everything Daniel had sent me. He'd pulled property records from Service Ontario. The house on Fox Ridge Crescent was still in my name, mortgage secured under a CAF housing program I'd qualified for a few years back. But that wasn't the alarming part. What made my throat go dry was a new document dated just 6 weeks ago, a refinance agreement. The loan amount was listed at $328,000, approved by a regional Scotiabank branch in Toronto, and it had my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. Not really, the pen stroke was close but sloppy. Whoever copied it missed the angle of the F and got the middle initial wrong. It was just off enough to be obvious to anyone who knew how I signed my name. A forgery, bold, stupid, and dangerous. Worse still, the refinance form listed a second name, Trevor McKay, as a co-applicant. That's when Daniel's voice on the phone had dropped a level. I ran a background check. He said Trevor's got priors, 2 counts of fraud, 1 in Ottawa, 1 in Sudbury, minor stuff, but enough to raise a flag. He shouldn't be co-signing anything, much less on a property you own solo. I landed in Toronto just after midnight, booked into a no-name motel off Highway 401 using an alias. I didn't go home. Didn't even drive past the house. Instead, I met Daniel the next morning in a diner out in Etobicoke. He looked older than I remembered, gray showing through the sides, eyes a little heavier. But when he handed me the folder of documents, his voice was as sharp as ever. "Here's everything. Title deed, mortgage file, loan, disbursement schedule. And this?" He paused, sliding a smaller sheet across the table, "is a recent bank statement from your joint account. Rachel's been siphoning funds since the day you deployed, small amounts at first, then larger ones. The big withdrawal. 47,000. Day after she signed the refinance." I stared at the numbers. I didn't feel anger, I felt focus. "She's been planning this," I said, "long before I left." Daniel nodded. "And she's not alone. Trevor's involved. But there's a third player." He pulled out a business card. "Luc Marchand, real estate specialist, Montreal and GTA. He's the one who handled the refinance paperwork. His name appears in 3 of the last property flips I traced, connected to Trevor. Same MO, woman files for divorce refinances, or sells home under duress. Buyer shows up with a cash offer below market." "This is a ring," I said quietly. "Looks like it, and you're not the first. But you might be the one who blows it open." That night, I set up my laptop on the motel desk and reviewed the security camera footage from home. I watched Trevor walk around like he owned the place, taking calls from the living room, rearranging furniture, even opening drawers in my office. I'd installed a hidden camera behind the bookshelf, just before deploying one of those 1080p cloud-based models. No blinking lights, no clicks, just quiet observation. Rachel hadn't even noticed. They were planning something. That much was clear. I caught bits of conversation. He won't be back for months. If we close before September, we're in the clear. Just make it look like he agreed. I clipped the best segments and uploaded them to a private drive, then shared the link with Daniel. Got him, I messaged. Let's move. The next day, I went to Scotiabank's regional office and met with the manager who'd approved the refinance. I didn't accuse anyone. I just showed him my military ID, my original signature from my CAF file, and then the forged document. His face went pale. We'll need to flag this immediately. He said, I've already reported it to a lawyer, I replied. Your cooperation now determines whether this becomes a bank error or part of something bigger. Later that afternoon, Rachel texted me. Who've you been talking to at the bank? Trevor says someone's asking questions. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into the downtown RCMP office and filed an official report for identity theft, property fraud, and forgery. This was no longer about Rachel. This was about the system she'd plugged into. And I was going to tear that system apart quietly, legally, and with precision. By the time Rachel texted me again, we need to talk. It's not what you think. I already had everything I needed. Her words didn't sting. They confirmed something else she knew. Not just that I was back, but that something was slipping out of her control. That was good. It meant the pressure was working. I was still staying at the motel under a different name. I kept my phone on, silent, monitored our house through the cloud-based security feed, and documented everything, every movement, every visitor, every careless conversation. Trevor wasn't subtle. He paraded around the house in my old t-shirts, took selfies with Murphy on the porch, and sat in my leather chair while making calls on speakerphone. From what I gathered, he was already acting as though the house was his. Rachel played along, cooking meals, rearranging furniture, calling contractors for minor repairs. I couldn't decide if she believed her own fantasy or was just trying to maintain the illusion long enough to close the deal. But the illusion shattered when Luc Marchand showed up. It was 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday. Rachel had just left the house, probably thinking I'd fall for the old meet me at Riverfront Park text she'd sent 20 minutes earlier. She thought I was on my way across town. I wasn't. I was parked across the street with Daniel in the passenger seat. Both of us watching the house through tinted windows. The car pulled up, sleek black Audi license plates registered in Quebec. The door opened, and out stepped Luc. I recognized him immediately from the business card Daniel had shown me. Tall, early 40s, polished shoes, and a blazer too clean for casual. Trevor came out to greet him like a client, not a criminal. They shook hands, laughed, and stepped inside. "You want to follow them in?" Daniel asked. "No need," I said, pulling up the app on my phone. The feed loaded instantly. Living room camera, microphone enabled. Luc was pacing, slowly scanning the room. Good bones, good staging, it'll list fast. Trevor gestured toward the back window. Great lighting, too. Backyard's quiet, no neighbors watching. "What's the listing price?" Luc asked. $470, but we expect a cash buyer to offer $420. Trevor replied. "We'll push it through. As is, husband's not around, military guy deployed. He won't contest it." Luc nodded, smirking. They never do. I glanced at Daniel. His jaw tightened as he hit record on his phone. That sentence, "he won't contest it." It was more than arrogance, it was premeditation. I forwarded the live stream to Agent Renault at the RCMP with a simple subject line, "Happening now." She replied 5 minutes later. "Units en route, do not interfere." From the car we watched as 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up quietly down the block. 10 minutes later, the agents moved. No sirens, no spectacle, just calm, methodical efficiency, a knock, a flash of badges. Then, both Luc and Trevor were led out in handcuffs, their faces twisted in stunned disbelief. Rachel arrived shortly after pulling into the driveway, just as the agents began removing boxes of paperwork from the house. She stepped out of her car, hands covering her mouth, visibly shaking. From the sidewalk, she looked up and down the street, as if searching for someone to explain what was happening. She didn't see me. I stayed in the car, watching her from a distance. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pity either. Just a cold, quiet finality. This was the cost of choices, of lies, of assuming that distance meant helplessness. Daniel turned to me. RCMP's got them. What about her? I shook my head. She's already signed away everything. Let the law decide the rest. That evening, I met with Agent Renault at the RCMP office in downtown Toronto. She was thorough, sharp-eyed, and impressively calm. Your footage gave us enough for wire fraud, attempted sale under false pretenses, conspiracy and forgery, she said. What about Rachel? I asked. She claims she thought the refinance was legitimate. Says Trevor convinced her you'd already agreed to sell the house. It's unclear whether she was a co-conspirator or just willfully ignorant. She forged my signature. I said plainly, yes. Agent Renault nodded. And that will factor into whether she's charged, but that depends on your next step. I don't want revenge, I replied. Just restitution and clarity. Understood. The next morning, I received a formal notice from the bank. The refinance funds had been frozen. Scotiabank issued a statement confirming the signature discrepancy and pledged full cooperation with the ongoing investigation. Half the funds were already traceable. Some had been transferred to Luke's business accounts, others to Trevor's personal card debt, the house locked under legal dispute. The assets seized for review. The damage documented. I returned to the motel and sat by the window as evening light stretched across the lot. I didn't know where Rachel was staying. Now I didn't care. My job wasn't to chase her, it was to finish the mission, and that mission wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about exposing the system that preyed on soldiers while they served. And now that system was bleeding. The day after Trevor and Luke were arrested, Rachel tried to call me 3 times. I didn't answer. She followed up with a long text. I didn't know what Trevor was doing. He told me you'd signed everything before deployment. Please, Liam, this isn't what you think, but I already knew. Not just what had happened, but who she'd become to let it happen. I didn't need more words. I had evidence, I had documentation. I had a system finally working in my favor. And more importantly, I had silence. And silence was my weapon. I met with Crown Prosecutor Lisa Tran at the Ministry of the Attorney General's regional office in Toronto. She reviewed my file alongside Agent Renaud, nodding as she flipped through documents, forged signature comparisons, bank transfers, camera footage, and witness reports from neighbors who'd seen Trevor and Luke making regular visits to the house in my absence. You understand, Lisa said carefully, that Rachel is in a legal gray area. If we can prove she knowingly submitted forged documents or facilitated the sale, she could be charged. But if we treat her as a cooperating witness, she may walk under conditions. I'm not looking for her to go to jail, I said flatly, but I want a full confession. In writing, and I want her to forfeit every financial claim against me, house, pension, joint, savings, everything. Agreed, Lisa said. If she refuses, we proceed with charges. Rachel must have sensed her choices were shrinking fast. Her lawyer reached out within 48 hours. A draft settlement arrived the next day. It was everything I asked for: full restitution of withdrawn funds through asset forfeiture, immediate and permanent forfeiture of any claims to my military pension, legal withdrawal from the house deed, and any refinance-related proceeds. A written signed confession, acknowledging knowledge of the forgery. She signed it. Not in person. Not with remorse, but the signature was there, and that was enough. A few nights later, I drove by the house one last time. The porch light was off. A for sale sign had been removed. The windows were dark, Trevor's truck was long gone, and Rachel, I had no idea where she was. Somewhere far from Fox Ridge Crescent, I imagined, probably blaming Trevor, maybe blaming herself, or maybe still convincing herself she'd been duped. I parked across the street and sat with the engine off. The same street where I once walked Murphy after work, the same porch where Rachel waited for me after my first overseas deployment, the same kitchen I had painted with my own hands. And now it was just a structure, just wood, glass, and drywall holding 1,000 moments that no longer belonged to anyone. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Closure doesn't always happen in the rooms where things broke. Sometimes it happens in the stillness just outside them. That weekend, I packed up my things from the motel and signed the final divorce documents at Daniel's office. No fault, no court appearance, just the quiet closing of a long chapter that had outlived its meaning. Daniel looked across the desk at me. "You got everything you asked for." "More than most guys in your situation, I didn't want revenge," I said. "Just the truth and the right to walk away with what I built. You've got that now." He stood up, handed me a plain brown envelope. "There's one more thing. Inside were printouts from the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. Names, addresses, more than a dozen Canadian Armed Forces members who'd fallen into similar patterns, divorced during deployment homes, sold out from under them, savings vanished. Some never recovered. Others were still fighting through appeals. You were the first to come forward with everything lined up." Daniel said, "Your case is going to help them rebuild theirs." I nodded slowly, the weight of that settling in my chest. I hadn't set out to be anyone's example. I'd just refused to be someone's victim. That evening back at the cabin I'd rented in Prince Edward County, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the last light slip through the treetops. Scout sat beside me, ears alert, calm as ever. A soft wind blew across the field. I hadn't heard Rachel's voice in weeks. I hadn't needed to. And then out of nowhere, a message buzzed through Rachel. "Again, I never meant for it to end like this. I thought we were broken beyond fixing. Trevor convinced me you didn't care anymore. I didn't think you'd even notice what we did. I read it once. No anger rose, no sadness. Just the steady breath of a man who'd seen too much to be rattled by words. I typed 3 words back. I noticed everything. Then I deleted the thread. That was the last time I heard from her. And that silence. It was louder than any scream she could have ever sent. I thought it was over. After the arrests, the settlement, and the final signature on the divorce decree, I truly believed that chapter was closed. I'd taken back what was mine. I'd exposed. The fraud preserved my name and reclaimed my peace. But then the phone rang. It was Agent Renaud. "There's something you need to see," she said. I met her at the RCMP regional office in downtown Toronto. She looked tired, more so than I remembered. A large manila folder sat on the table between us. She slid it forward with a sigh. "We've been digging deeper into Marchand and McKay," she said. "Your case cracked open a pattern we've been trying to confirm for over a year. Now we're seeing the full picture." Inside the folder were photos, financial documents, timelines, and summaries of 11 other cases, most involving CAF members or reservists. Different provinces, different banks, but the playbook nearly identical. They target spouses of deployed soldiers, she continued. Most of them have power of attorney, or at least control over joint accounts. Marchand operates through shell agents, sometimes legitimate realtors, sometimes unlicensed brokers. Trevor acts like the emotional rescuer, convincing women their husbands are hiding assets, cheating, or planning to leave them. Once they believe it, the rest is easy: refinance, sell, strip the equity, and walk. I flipped through one case from Edmonton. A master corporal had returned home to find his wife gone. The house sold for 60% of market value, and his retirement fund emptied. Another from Halifax involved a similar story, only the soldier never came home, killed in a training accident. His spouse had refinanced the house a week before his death. The funds disappeared days later, and these victims. I paused, unable to finish the thought. They never knew, Agent Renault said. Until it was too late. She opened her laptop and brought up a digital map. Red dots scattered across the country, Victoria, Winnipeg, Gatineau, St. John's, all the same scam. All orchestrated through a network of opportunists using grief distance and bureaucracy as weapons, and because your case has the most complete set of records. Timeline, audio footage, and legal standing, we're building a federal case off it, not just fraud. Organized conspiracy to defraud military personnel under active duty status. I leaned back, breath slow. It wasn't just about me anymore. It hadn't been for a while. So what do you need? I asked. We want you to testify at a federal hearing. She said, help solidify the case, identify gaps, and support potential restitution for the other victims. You'd remain under protective identity. No press, no public exposure. I thought about it for a long moment. I'd built my piece brick by brick, quiet mornings, scout chasing deer in the yard, carving wood under the sound of rustling trees. And now that quiet life was being asked to rise again for something bigger. I'll do it, I said. Daniel wasn't surprised when I told him. You knew it wasn't just about the house the moment you saw Marchand's name, he said. This is the part where you choose what kind of man you want to be after all of it. A week later, I was in Ottawa, anonymous, seated in a private hearing room reserved for federal testimonies. I told them everything, start to finish. I walked through the email from Rachel, the forged documents, the staged listing, the phrases caught on camera. When I described Trevor's voice saying he's deployed, he won't fight it. The room went still. One of the investigators actually stopped writing. Another just muttered, Jesus. They asked about Rachel. I kept my answers clinical, precise. She was part of it, whether willingly or by neglect. But she'd signed her confession. She was no longer my concern. I didn't speak like a victim. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth, the way we're taught to do in debriefs, clean, clear, actionable. After the session, one of the agents pulled me aside. Young guy, looked like he'd barely finished his training. My uncle lost his pension in a similar scam. He said he didn't know how to fight it. They said there was no evidence. What you did here, it changes things. I nodded once. Tell him he wasn't crazy. They just hadn't found the pattern yet. Later that night, back in my cabin, I stood at the workbench and ran my hands along a rough slab of cedar. Scout slept in the corner, snoring softly. A warm breeze drifted through the open window. On the wall above my bench, I pinned a printed email from the Department of National Defense. It read, Your testimony has contributed to the establishment of a multi-agency task force investigating targeted financial crimes against military families. Full case coordination underway. I didn't need awards. I didn't want recognition, but I did want this A system that no longer ignored the quiet theft behind uniforms. A warning shot fired from silence that echoed louder than any headline. Court isn't like what you see on TV. It's not drama and shouting and verdicts that shake the room. Real court is slower, tighter. It breathes in silence and every word carries weight because it's one of the few places left where the truth has to stand still long enough for people to look at it. The provincial courthouse in downtown Toronto was cold. Not the temperature, though it was that too, but the kind of sterile coldness you only find in places built for procedure, not people. The walls were white, the benches hard, and the lights didn't flicker. It wasn't a place for revenge. It was a place for reckoning. I sat with Crown Prosecutor Lisa Tran and Agent Renault at a side table while Trevor McKay took his seat at the defendant's stand, flanked by his lawyer. His hair was slicked back suit, too tight, tie too loud for the setting. Luc Marchand wasn't there. He'd already pled out, taken a deal in exchange for his full cooperation. He was going to testify against Trevor in exchange for a shorter sentence. Rachel sat 2 rows behind Trevor, eyes down. She looked smaller somehow. Not fragile, just faded. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. Lisa leaned over. "We start with you. You're our cornerstone." I nodded. Once I'd done this 100 times in uniform. Briefings, debriefs, testimony during internal CAF reviews. This was just another room, another mission. The objective: expose and explain. When I took the stand, the court clerk asked me to state my name for the record: warrant officer Liam Fraser. Retired. That word retired sat heavier on my tongue than I expected. Lisa began with the basics. How long I'd served, my deployment history. The house in North York. The structure of the refinance. Then she moved into the details: the forged signature, the withdrawals, the wire transfers, the camera footage. My voice was steady, factual. I didn't flinch when she played the clip where Trevor's voice rang out. "He's deployed. He won't fight this." That phrase hung in the courtroom like smoke. No one moved for a full 3 seconds. I could feel the judge's eyes on me. Justice Elaine McCarthy was known for being exacting, fair, but blunt. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just listened. Measured, her hands folded tightly on the bench. I could tell she wasn't impressed by Trevor's bravado or his strategy. The defense tried to spin a different story. Trevor's lawyer claimed he had been misled by Rachel, that he had no idea the signature was forged, that he thought Liam had agreed to everything before deployment. He described Trevor as romantically involved, but legally uninformed. Then Rachel was called. She walked slowly to the stand. Her voice was shaky. She looked around only once, never toward me. She said Trevor convinced her that I'd abandoned our marriage, that I had money hidden in untraceable accounts, and that refinancing the house was a way to protect what was left. Her voice cracked when Lisa asked whether she'd verified my signature. "No," she said. "He showed me a document. I wanted to believe it." The judge didn't respond. She just wrote something down, then turned to Lisa, next witness. Agent Renault took the stand. She presented the financial trail, the deposits into Luc Marchand's company, the rapid turnaround on the refinance, the connection between Rachel's statements and Trevor's actions. She showed how the same tactics had been used across provinces, across families. Lisa closed by stating calmly, "This was not about love. This was about calculated financial predation, hiding behind the emotional vulnerability of military absence, Mr. Fraser was simply the one who had the foresight and discipline to record it." Trevor never looked at me. Not once, even as the guilty verdict was read. 8 years, that's what he got. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted property theft. Luc Marchand got 6, Rachel wasn't charged. Her cooperation, confession, and forfeiture were deemed sufficient. Afterward, Lisa caught me outside the courtroom. "You good?" she asked. "I'm steady," I replied. "That's more important. You did more than protect yourself. You cracked open a pattern we couldn't prove for years. I didn't have a response for that. I wasn't looking for impact. I was looking for restoration. Back at my cabin that night, I poured a single glass of whiskey and stood out under the stars. Scout curled up at my feet as always. No sound, just wind across the trees and a faint echo of closure. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something better. I felt clear. Trevor was behind bars. Rachel was gone. The house was mine. The truth had spoken, not with shouting, not with rage, but with calm, in court, on record, and permanently. 1 year. That's how long it had been since the arrests, since the trial, since Rachel faded out of my life like a shadow cast by a closing door. And in all that time, not once did I think about calling her, Not to ask how she was. Not to ask why I didn't need answers anymore. I'd moved out of Toronto 6 months after the verdict, sold the house. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't stomach the walls anymore. Every room echoed a betrayal I didn't want to carry into my future. The kitchen where I found Trevor on camera drinking from my mug. The bedroom that once held 12 years of trust. The hallway where I hung my uniform after each deployment. Too many ghosts, too many echoes. Instead, I bought a cabin in Prince Edward County, 2 bedrooms, pine floors, a wood stove that crackled like old radio static. 10 acres of forest, no neighbors in sight. It wasn't silence, it was peace, there's a difference. Scout adjusted quickly. He roamed the woods like he'd been born there. Every morning, he'd sit by the front porch, watching the fog roll in from the lake. I joined him with coffee hands, rough from woodworking mind. Clear for the first time in years, I thought I was done with the story. Until the letter came. It was handwritten, no return address, just my name carefully spelled, almost too carefully, on the front. Inside was a single page in slanted script. Rachel Liam, I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it, even if you offered it. I've spent this past year trying to figure out where I stopped being a good person, or if I ever was. Trevor lied to me, that much is true, but I let him. I let him fill the spaces where I had grown resentful and cold, and convinced myself that you'd always choose the army over me. I didn't want to destroy you, but I did. And I watched it happen. I'm sorry, not for the consequences, but for the choice to believe you'd never notice, never care, never come back. You noticed everything, that's what hurt the most. Arm. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and pinned it inside the back of my tool cabinet, not to keep her close, but to remember the weight of what nearly broke me. It wasn't an apology I needed. It was evidence that even now the truth still echoed. A few days later, I got a call from Agent Renaud. The federal task force is expanding your case set precedent. There's going to be a national report issued by the end of the year. We're including your testimony. I didn't ask why she was calling. I didn't need a spotlight, but she wasn't done. There's something else. A woman in Fort McMurray, CAF, reservist. She almost signed a refinance deal with one of Marchand's affiliates. Her friend recognized the name from the public brief. She stopped the deal just in time. There was a pause. She wrote a letter. Asked us to pass it to you. Another letter. This one typed shorter. You don't know me, but your fight saved my house. I was one signature away from losing everything. Someone said you didn't let it slide when it happened to you. So I didn't either. Thank you, M. That one I didn't pin inside the cabinet. I stuck it to the fridge right next to a worn-out magnet shaped like a canoe that my dad had given me years ago. Every morning since I've looked at that letter while pouring coffee, not out of pride, but because it reminded me that fighting quietly still counts. Spring turned to summer. I rebuilt the back porch with cedar I cut myself. Scout started slowing down a bit, gray around the muzzle. We were both getting older. But for once, it didn't feel like something was slipping away. It felt earned. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the lake, I took down Rachel's letter, folded it for the last time, put it in a metal box alongside old medals, deployment photos, and my father's cufflinks. Then I sealed the lid. Closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just quiet, like a door that doesn't slam, just closes gently behind you. I didn't forgive her, but I didn't hate her either. She made her choices. I made mine. And somewhere between the silence and the sawdust, I found something I hadn't expected. A life that was entirely, irrevocably mine. I never meant to become a symbol. I just didn't want to be another uniform who came home to ashes. Another man who gave everything abroad only to be erased at home. But somewhere along the way, silence turned into a spotlight, and I didn't flinch. It's early spring in Prince Edward County. The air still has a bite, but the ground is softening and you can hear the creak again. Scout's been waking me up earlier, some instinct in him sensing that the world is starting fresh. I've started building a second shed out back. Not because I need it, but because I like what building things does to my mind. It slows the noise, reminds me that creation, even after destruction, is a choice you make every day. I've kept to myself mostly. But sometimes the right kind of people find you even when you're not looking. Thomas showed up on a Wednesday, 28 lean tense. The kind of man who flinches when a car door slams too hard. He'd served in Latvia with a KF logistics unit, then came home to find his stepbrother had forged his name to sell off the family cabin while he was in treatment for PTSD. "I heard about you through a lawyer in Kingston," he said. "Said you were the guy who didn't let it slide." I didn't say anything, just nodded, handed him a hammer, and pointed to a pile of reclaimed pine. We worked together in silence that day. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, he was sanding down a beam with steady hands. "You ever get tired of being angry?" he asked me, not looking up. I thought about it. "No," I said. But I got better at changing what it pointed at. Over the weeks, Thomas came back. We didn't talk about trauma therapy or forgiveness. We talked about angle joints and cedar knots and how snow loads impact roofing. That was enough, maybe more than enough. One Saturday, while we were oiling the new porch, he asked, "What did you do after it all ended?" After the trial, after the house, after her, I didn't answer right away. I just handed him a cloth and said, "I built this." The truth is, that's what it came down to. Not rebuilding what was lost, but choosing what comes next. I wasn't trying to replace Rachel or salvage the house or outrun the anger. I just wanted a space where nothing was fake, where every nail I drove into wood stayed there because I put it there, not because someone else decided what I deserved. One night, sitting at my workbench with a mug of tea and a quiet storm moving in across the fields, I opened the box where I'd kept all the old things. Rachel's letter court transcripts, photocopies of forged documents. I flipped through them one last time. Then I burned the lot in the fire barrel out back. Not for ceremony, not for drama, just because it was time. I didn't need the paper trail anymore. The lessons had settled into the bones. Later that month, I got an official email from the Department of National Defense final report. Completed class action protections. Initiated your case. Set legal precedent for protecting deployed CAF personnel from financial fraud and asset abuse. Your testimony has been cited in 6 ongoing reforms. I didn't forward the email, didn't print it, just stared at it for a while, then closed the screen and stepped outside. The wind smelled like earth, like thawing cedar and something new. Scout stood by the tree line, ears up. I whistled. He came running. We hiked to the edge of the property where the creek cuts through moss and shale. I sat on a boulder worn smooth by decades of water Scout's head on my knee. Above us, the sky held that silver-blue hue only April skies know how to hold. And I thought about all the things I'd lost. Not just Rachel or the house or the years I'd spent trying to be 2 men at once, soldier and husband. I thought about the men who didn't speak up, the ones who still thought it was their fault. And then I thought about the ones who'd written to me. Quiet letters from Halifax, Fort McMurray, Moose Jaw. All of them saying the same thing in different ways. You didn't let it slide, so I didn't either. That was enough. That was more than enough. You see, in war, we're trained to assess, to react, to strike. But no one teaches us how to rebuild when the enemy isn't across a border, but across a kitchen table. I had to learn that part on my own, and I did, nail by nail, cut by cut, day by day. Now I live in a house I built with a dog who never left, and a silence that isn't empty, it's earned. I don't need apologies. I don't need justice anymore. I have something better. Peace. Some betrayals don't scream. They unfold in whispers, bank statements, forged signatures, a stranger's toothbrush in your bathroom, for Liam Fraser. The battlefield wasn't just overseas, it was at home, behind closed doors and quiet lies. He didn't raise his voice, he raised the truth. Piece by piece, he reclaimed not just his house, but his name, his dignity, and the right to start again on his own terms. This wasn't just a story about a soldier being betrayed by the person he trusted most. It was a story about stillness as strategy, about watching when others expect you to break, about building not just revenge, but a new life that no one else could touch. Sometimes the most powerful sentence isn't "I forgive you" or "I hate you," it's "I noticed everything." And from there you begin again, not with rage, but with resolve. If this story moved you, hit like to let the silence speak louder than chaos. Subscribe for more real stories of justice that doesn't scream, it plans, and drop I in the comments. If you believe sometimes rebuilding is the strongest form of revenge, we tell these stories so you know. You're not alone, you're not weak for being quiet, and the smartest revenge is the life they can't destroy.